Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, you probably didn't know there was such a thing as a digital age of consent, so it can only be a surprise that a proposal is afoot in the EU to raise it from 13 to 16. What would it mean in practice? The most striking consequence would be that no one would be able to process data of an under 16-year-old without parental consent. What does that mean? So young teens wouldn't be able to go on social media without permission. Which raises the question, is social media a healthy pastime for young people? Joining me now from Dublin are Mary Aiken, a cyber psychologist and an advisor to the UN on this issue, and also with me in the studio, vlogger Lex Croucher. Evening to you both. Mary, I just want to start with you. What do you think is the problem with 13, 14, 15-year-olds, unregulated by adults, going into social media space?
I think the issue that we're talking about at the moment, the current guidelines centre on those who are under 13. And what we know that in terms of studies is that actually 39% of 9 to 12-year-olds have social media accounts. So clearly the current guidelines are not being adhered to. I think this is another step forward in terms of data protection, where the EU is proposing, and it's a proposal, to actually adjust that age up to 16, right, which effectively means 15-year-olds
right,
and under.
But just take me through what some of the psychological problems are with those 15-year-olds being on Facebook, chatting to each other, whatever.
Well, I think chatting on Facebook doesn't cause psychological problems. I think the issue is one about periods of development. So, for example, if you take a young child who's 8 or 9 who develops a large network, is really are they developmentally mature enough to be able to cope with huge numbers of friends, whether they're 8, 9, 10 or 11, and particularly prior to fundamental development periods such as Erikson's identity formation, which happens between 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There is a recommended number in cyber psychology, and I'm a cyber psychologist, that the recommended number for relationships is actually 150. And as humans, once we build networks beyond that number, we begin to suffer from social stress and social exhaustion. Can you imagine the burden for very young children with thousands of connections?
Right. Let me bring Lex in. Lex, I mean, how many Facebook friends do you have?
I don't have that many Facebook friends. I only have about 300 Facebook friends. So
that's still 150 more than the magic number.
It might not be manageable.
And do you recognise any of the sort of the problem Mary was describing there?
I definitely think when we're talking about sort of 9 to 12-year-olds, that is a bit of a different issue. But I also see lots of positive changes that have come about because of communities on the internet, communities through social media. So I know that lots of people find people that have similar interests, maybe make friends they wouldn't be able to in groups like that on the internet.
So you can find niche groups who are closer to your interests. Now, you're in your 20s now, and you started at what age?
I was on social media forums from the age of about 14. 14.
So you would have been affected by this raising of the age. I mean, Mary, take me through what it does to someone who's obviously at a state of development, just the harm it can do to them. You've described having too many friends isn't great, but what harm can come to someone who is 14 or 15 and creates an avatar online and they're out there, you know, being that person?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting construct. I mean, as a behavioural scientist, this is an area that we study. And I think behavioural sciences are lagging behind in terms of being able to advise parents or caregivers regarding these issues. But for example, if a child creates an idealized version of self on a social media site, which is a highly manipulated self, I mean physically manipulated, better skin, shinier hair, stretched to be 5 pounds lighter, that virtual self may be increasingly distant from the real world self, and that can lead to psychological conflict, hypothetically. So I conduct research in this area we're looking at these transitions over time, in 10 years' time, we'll be able to tell you the impact of spending that amount of time on social media for children at certain ages. But we would recommend that we don't have to wait for the longitudinal studies and that we actually pay attention to the issues now.
Okay. Lex, well, that's an interesting point there, that there's a kind of gulf between your online self and your real self. Now, was that true of you, do you think? Or were you jealous of others as you saw them cleaner skin and no spots or whatever online?
I think it was actually a different culture for me 10 years ago, so some of those issues might be more prevalent now. I just felt like I made sort of more genuine connections with people. I was quite an anxious teenager, so I found lots of friends online that I couldn't really interact with in person. So for me, it was a really positive experience. But then again, the culture is changing.
Do you agree with raising the age and saying you have to have parental consent? I mean,
I just don't think it'd be effective. I can't imagine how it'll be enforced.
I mean, there is that issue. Would you advise parents, Mary, to say yes when they're 14-year-olds? Suppose they did raise the age. 14-year-old says, can I go on Facebook? Would you advise a parent to say yes?
If the law stipulated that they should be 16, I would never advise a parent to knowingly to...
No, well, the law would stipulate with parental permission you can go on, but only with parental permission, as I understand it. So it puts an adult into that space in a way that at the moment is completely ungoverned with no authority figure, really, isn't it?
I think it depends on the child, and parents are best placed to decide how their child should proceed or not on a particular platform. But I would also question, how much do parents really know about what their children are doing online? So when a technology company develops an app that allows a minor to take an explicit image and to send it and the image dissolves, now you're really into an ethical and moral issue. We've just had a case in Colorado where a group of young people were using ghost apps, which effectively can look like a screen calculator, with massive collections of images, sexted images, which they were sharing. And parents would have no idea. So to Lex's point, there is that gap.
We do need to stop it. Sorry, Mary, we do need to stop it, but I know there are many parents desperate for advice of the kind you can give. Thank you, and Lex, thank you too very much.
I've been getting away with it all my